Now, moving on into what we'll talk about this week, we'll get some basics about what it takes to live as an organism and how food as culture is shaped by food as nutrition. So, about 1,300 calories to 1,700 calories is needed to maintain your basic kinds of functions as a human. So this is so that your brain can keep working, your heart beating, your lungs pumping, all these kinds of things. But in the US, an average recommended intake is closer to 2,000 or 3,000 calories, depending on the size of an adult. This includes approximately 50 grams protein and less than 60 grams fat. And many people would tell you that the healthiest diets are those that are the most varied. So lots of different kinds of vegetables. You sometimes hear eating the rainbow, lots of different kinds of colors of vegetables, and minimal calories coming from animal protein. And people kind of looking around the world at who lives the longest, and many people would say that the healthiest people, those with less incidence of heart disease and really significant kinds of health problems, are those that follow this sort of diet. But then there's what it takes to live as a human, and it's part of a cultural group. Much of this includes rules. You may have learned at a very early age how to eat with chopsticks. You might also have learned never to put your elbows on the table. And this is all part of socialization into eating. And that means those kind of unwritten or sometimes explicit cultural rules about how it is proper to eat and what is proper to eat. Now, as we'll discuss a little bit later in the semester, this also goes into age, gender, class, and other social categories. So you may have been held up to a different standard once you made it from the kids' table to the adult table at Thanksgiving. If you're female or if you're a woman, you might have different expectations for knowing which fork to use when your salad is served, or other kinds of rules by gender and class. How to eat, when to eat. Is it appropriate to eat when you're standing up for you? This is actually a cultural rule. In many different parts of the world, it's not appropriate to eat when you're standing up, or maybe it's not appropriate to eat when you're walking along the road, for instance. And yet here on campus, you probably see many people enjoying snacks as they're running from one class to another. So these are the kinds of things that we learn as part of a cultural group. And understanding also where you are in production and consumption of food. So not just eating the food and how you should eat it, but also where that food comes from. How often do you think about what farm field your last vegetable came from? And how is this influenced by culture? Now, one of the readings that you'll do this week is by Anderson and talks a little bit about what constitutes a healthy diet. He gives us an outline of some of the elements that are needed to survive as humans and thrive. But even in his chapter, he talks a lot about the differences, how in some cases this is really necessary, but in many places or parts of the world, you might not be able to find that specific nutrient, and so how cultural groups are able to sort of get around those limitations. So there is a lot of variation in what is available and what kinds of things people get just sort of as a byproduct. So how do we come up with our standards with what humans must have in order to live? I want you to think about this as you do your readings. Is this system completely outside of culture? So in the US, we talk a lot about scientific guidelines, FDA guidelines. But where do these actually come from? Who gets to decide? Are we being force-fed like this poor kid with his strawberries? Where is the best place to live in order to eat most healthfully? Think about that for a little while. And how do you get this idea about what is the best place to live in order to eat most healthfully? How do you get these ideas about what is healthy? Now we'll also be reading an article by Sydney Mintz about some of the cultural values that are tied up with eating, like we've been talking about already. So they'll talk about the links between environment, food habits and food ways, and cultural practices and values. Anderson gives several examples of cultural groups where there are constraints on the environment, so maybe people living in the Arctic or people living in very dry climates, where ecology and environment limit the essential vitamins and minerals that are available. But these groups gradually center eating habits around particular foods that fulfill their dietary needs that are available in that environment. And then those become part of their culture. which then might also affect the environment. If they're doing significant things in terms of irrigation or farming or hunting certain kinds of animals versus other animals, these sorts of things affect the environment and this is where human culture makes an impact on ecology. So it goes both ways. Now, something that Mintz sort of talks about, but Anderson does not, is that someone has to make decisions about what are essential parts of human diet and how these are described. And this also has to do with culture. So one of the examples that is used is anemia in India. Now, if you have taken a nutrition class, you might have learned that you need the nutrient iron in order to prevent anemia, which is a kind of disease or health issue that can affect people and can have a really big impact on your life. If you get low levels of iron, we've learned in the US, then this means that you may have trouble fighting disease, your blood will not have enough iron in it. And so we have learned that we need to eat lots of proteins in order to get our iron. Now in India, they have learned that they should be eating a lot of spices because it improves your complexion and it gives you a glow so that you don't have pallor. Now, some scientists have found out that these spices contain high amounts of iron, which then it gives you this nutrient. So eating spices were giving you the needed nutrients, and thus it was giving you a glow to your skin because you had enough of the nutrient. These are two different ways, two different cultural ways of looking at the same issue. And so this is one of the kinds of ways that we can think about how different or the same issue can be described because of culture in different ways. So what? What does this all mean? In contemporary times, anthropology is a really important way to look at food and foodways and could also potentially help to solve emerging problems like food insecurity, who has enough food to eat, where that food is coming from. People talk a lot about the world food crisis, and we as anthropologists might be able to help if we look at not just what nutrients are necessary, but what people think is appropriate to eat and when, and how we can get that food across the world from one place to another. We can think about illnesses related to diet and consumption patterns, and we can also think about foodborne pathogens and disease, how food gets contaminated when it moves from place to place, and how this might be prevented. So problems such as these are going to become an even greater threat as globalization continues. And this brings people and things and food in contact with each other more quickly and easily. So it's important to kind of take a look at it again. So, in closing, I want to welcome you again to this class. I think it's going to be a blast. And you can look forward to these very short lectures. Instead of your classroom that you would normally have to go to, you can come to this lecture module each week. You'll have one, it will be posted on D2L under content. Now remember to check D2L often and to read your syllabus after you watch this short lecture module. So I'm really looking forward to this semester, and I hope you are too. It's going to be a blast. So bon appetit!